Hey there everyone, I hope you're all safe and I hope your families are all safe as well. So for this recipe we're going to be making a seitan hot dog. For those that don't know, seitan is a meat substitute. It's made from vital wheat gluten. I far prefer it to meat nowadays. I used to when I was a younger man. Not eating anything but meat and cheese and chips pretty much. That was my limit. Now meat wouldn't pass my mouth at all, and I far prefer all the different substitutes that are out there, but seitan being my favourite. Hence why up the top corner you've got my little devil, my little seitan. So what is it we're making? We're making chorizo flavoured hot dog. I serve it with a sub roll, which you've saw in a previous video on how I go about making them. Absolutely gorgeous on the roll. So without further ado, let's crack on. Let's see how to make this. So the very first thing we're going to prepare is 1 block of frozen crushed garlic, or if you're using fresh cloves you're going to need 4 cloves, which you're going to have to then dice up nicely. Next up we require our chickpeas, and we're looking at half a can of chickpeas, which equates to around about 125 grams. Now I'm using frozen chickpeas here because these are from the last batch of hot dogs I made, and because I only require half a can, the other half can got frozen straight away. So now I'm making a new batch. Here's that batch of chickpeas, so about 125 grams per can. This one obviously had a little bit more in it the last time. And vegetable stock wise, we require 290 millimeters of vegetable stock. As 1 OXO cube makes up 190 milliliters, that means that we need 2 OXO cubes, which we're just going to take and crumble into our measuring jug in anticipation of adding the water when we require it. And then it's 3 tablespoons of dried mushrooms. I use a mix of 2 to 1 of forest and porcini. Partially because I like the flavour combination, but also because it's cheaper to use forest mushrooms in a mix with porcini than just using straight porcini mushrooms. And now that the mushrooms are ready and in a bowl, we're going to add the water to our stock, give it a good mix together with a spoon, and then we can add that to our mushrooms. And directly after we add our stock to our mushrooms, we're going to cover it in a plate just to make sure that all the steam condenses and it helps rehydrate the mushrooms until we're ready to use them. So you now have 2 options. You can either use a large fresh red onion, which we're going to take the top off, we're going to de-skin it, and we're then going to roughly chop it. Or you can use around about 150 grams of frozen red onion, which you're then going to need to let defrost. And now we're looking to add 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil to a stainless steel pan. The reason we're using stainless steel is that will help caramelise your onion. Non-stick pans don't really help caramelise onion very well, so we want to use something other than non-stick. We then want to set it to a medium-high heat and bring it up to temperature. And as in this instance I'm using the frozen red onion for the recipe, you want to drain out any of the water from the defrosting. We don't need the onion to completely defrost, but we do need the worst of the freeze to have come off it. And by now, because of the type of pan we're using is very thin walled, it's likely reached temperature. You can check by looking for the convection currents and also by adding a few of the chopped up onion, and if it starts to sizzle, it's ready to cook. Now because this is frozen onion, it's going to need to be cooked a bit longer than it would for the fresh onion. The frozen onion we're going to cook for 14 minutes until it's nice and caramelised. Just adjust your temperature accordingly. There could have been a thermal shock which made you lose a lot of temperature in the pan, so you might need to turn it up just slightly for a short period of time before bringing it back to a medium heat. And if it was fresh onion that we're using, we're going to be cooking that for 7 minutes until it's really nice and caramelising. And make sure whilst we're caramelising our onion that we do stir them quite often. We don't want them stuck and we don't want them burnt, so we're looking for caramelisation evenly across all of the onions. So stir it relatively frequently over the either 7 or the 14 minutes, depending whether it's fresh or frozen onion that you're using. And somewhere between a minute and 30 seconds before we think our onions are going to be about done. We're going to add our garlic and we're going to cook them until they're fragrant. And both should be ready about the same time. If the garlic cooks a little bit longer, don't worry, but we don't want to give the garlic far too long because then we risk burning it. So somewhere between that 60 seconds to 30 seconds of where you think the onions are going to be done, we're looking to add the garlic. It's better to cook the onions slightly longer and have them over caramelised than cook the garlic for too long and burn it. And once the garlic and onion are ready, once it's nicely caramelised and we've got the fragrant garlic, we're going to take and we're going to add that to the blender. You can add them whilst hot, don't worry about it, just fire in. As soon as they're ready, transfer them across. We then want to add 2 tablespoons of liquid smoke straight into the blender. I use this brand because value for money wise, you buy it in bulk and it saves you a ton of money compared to the small bottles that you actually buy in the supermarkets. And next up we can add the mushrooms and the stock that we had them sitting rehydrating in. Now, if your chickpeas, like in my instance here, were frozen, you're going to have to defrost them first because you don't want it damaging your blender. Otherwise, this is the stage that we add the chickpeas in. And next up, we're going to add 4 tablespoons of tomato puree to our blender. I probably should have mentioned this already, it is in the recipe. If you don't have a blender, you can use a food processor, but a blender is the better option. I'm not a big fan of blenders because it's hard to get your stuff out of it, but it is the better option this time round. And next up is 1 tablespoon of olive oil. Now you could do it the way I show you in most of my other videos, which is to measure out your paprika ahead of the game, but in this instance I'm just measuring 2.5 tablespoons of smoked paprika straight into the blender. I chose to do it this way just through the nature of this dish. It doesn't really require speed at this point, so we can take our time and add the ingredients as we need to get to them, so we don't need to prepare them ahead of the game. Again, measure it straight into the blender, and this time we're adding 1 teaspoon of table salt, followed by 1 teaspoon of miso paste. Now ideally you're going to use a dark miso rather than a light miso or a red miso. It just complements the meaty flavour better. That's not to say it's wrong to use a red or a light miso in the ingredients instead of the dark, as it's all about the umami flavour we're trying to get. I just personally think the dark complements it better. And next up we're going to add half a teaspoon of cayenne pepper, again straight into the blender. Most importantly, we've all saw the movies, we've all saw the You've Been Framed type videos where somebody forgets to put the lid on the blender. Don't be that person, put your lid on now. And when it comes to actually now blending all the ingredients together, you're probably going to have to go in and take a spatula down to the side walls. Just pulse it, turn it off, go in, take the spatula in and repeat as necessary until you can see everything has blended well together. But if you put the things in the order I suggested, the nature of the liquids at the bottom should help it blend really well. If you go in a slightly different order and it's the heavier stuff in followed by the liquids, or the dry ingredients followed by the liquids, you might have more trouble getting your blender to operate. But go in the order I've shown you, and I think that gives the optimum way of getting your blender to do the job a blender should. Now unfortunately comes the difficult part, and it's the reason that I am not a fan of blenders. It's trying to get all of this out of the blender. It's not a very runny liquid we've made. Yes, it's fluid, but it's not particularly runny, so there's a bit of effort now required going in with the spatula, maybe even unscrewing the blades at the bottom and going in from the top, the sides, anything you can do to get as much of this out as possible, because we don't want wastage, we want it all out, but that does mean taking your time, being careful, putting the spatula all around the different parts of the blender and getting in to access any parts you might need to access by opening it up and getting into it. Unfortunately, it's the bit that's messy, it's the bit that's time consuming, it's the bit you're just going to have to get through. Sorry. Now, if you have a dough paddle attachment for your food processor, we're going to go in and we're going to do this in the food processor. You need to measure out 270 grams of vital wheat gluten. If you don't have the dough paddle attachment, you're probably going to have to do this by hand. You're going to measure this into a mixing bowl, and we're going to need everything by hand as we go around. But if you've got the paddle, do it in the food processor. It saves you a little bit of work. And into the food processor, we're also going to add 50 grams of gram flour, also known as chickpea flour because it comes from chickpeas, and also known as besan flour. So any of those three names is what you're looking for, but 50 grams. And for a further kick of umami flavour, we're going to be adding 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast. And from here we can add in all the wet ingredients that we had in our blender. Excuse me, I did something daft and I lost the footage of actually adding the wet ingredients to the dry ingredients in the food processor. But you get the picture. Take and scrape it all in with a spatula. Just make sure, again, we're not getting any wastage. Add as much as we possibly can into that bowl. And whether you're doing it by hand or whether you've got the luxury of using a machine, we're going to have to knead our seitan now for 5 minutes until it comes together to form a nice substantial dough. As long as your food processor is not going to vibrate off the surface, you can now go and take and organise yourself some tin foil sheets. These are quite large sheets that I use, so I'm halving them, so we're going to use these to wrap our seitan logs in for shaping and cooking our hot dogs. And by now the seitan should be coming together, it should be forming quite a substantial dough. Just keep an eye on it. But what you see here in the food processor now is pretty much exactly what we're looking for, whether you're doing it by hand or whether you're using it in the machine. This is the end stage, this is what you're seeking to see in your processor or by hand. And from here we're going to split our seitan into 4 equal parts. Eventually it'll be 8 equal parts, but to start with just now we're looking for 4 equal parts of roughly 205 grams each. That sort of ballpark, might be slightly less, might be slightly more, but try and keep it as accurate as possible, and that way we end up with 8 equal sized hot dogs come the end of the process. We then want to take and roll them into 4 rough log shapes. Careful to remove the knife out the way so we don't lose a finger though. So nothing major at the minute, just press them together, give them a slight knead and then start rolling them. We're not looking for a full hot dog sausage shape yet, we're just getting the seitan to start to head towards the direction that we want to take it. So a bit of kneading, a bit of rolling, a sort of log shape as you see here. And just repeat the process for all 4 by kneading and then rolling, kneading and then rolling. Once we have done that, we're going to let the seitan rest for 2 minutes because it then becomes easier after the proteins have relaxed a little bit to roll it further and get it into the actual shape that we want to finish them off in. And after resting, we're going to roll them into long hot dog logs. They're not yet quite at the stage of what we would call the size that we're looking for the hot dogs, but we're pushing them out and we're getting them much closer to that. Start at the centre and roll out as you see my hands doing. Just use the heel of your hands into the palm of your hands and draw and drag and draw and drag as you pull them out. Think of plasticine when you were a kid and how you used to roll plasticine sausage out. It's the exact same technique we did then, except this time we're doing it for seitan. We're going to then set this aside and do the other 3 logs, and we're going to put them aside once we're done with each one individually. And now we want to take our sausage, bring it back, we're going to half it, and from here we're going to then roll it out into our final hot dog shape. When it comes to the halving, you're just going to eyeball it to see roughly that looks about close to the halfway point. We've already got them quite accurate and it's not mega difficult to eyeball it and get it close enough so that all 8 sausages end up close as darn the same way. So just take again, roll it out, same technique, think of the plasticine, start in the middle and pull it out to the sides. Don't be too rough, you do have a chance of risk of pulling the sausage apart if you do get too rough. So if you feel that happening, just let it rest again and then go back to it after it's a chance to rest for a minute or 2, and that reduces the chance of you ripping it apart. set them aside, repeat the process for all 8 logs because we're having to get our 8 and roll out and keep doing the process over and over. Now that we have all 8 sausages, we're going to take and we're going to add them to oil-lined tinfoil paper. After giving the edge a light spray of oil, we're going to take, as we see, and we're going to place the sausage down at the edge, and then we're going to roll up slightly, and using our fingertips we're going to tuck the tinfoil tight until it goes under, then roll it round, and then at each end we're just going to twist the tinfoil, pull it tight. We want to get a lot of pressure on the ends because we want the seitan to keep that shape as it cooks in the water when we get to that stage. And then it's just a case of repeating the process for all 8 sausages. If you need to, you give the sausage a roll out one more time just before adding it because it will potentially have contracted a bit just before we're ready to use it. So if you need to, another wee roll out and then add it to the tinfoil. Then want to take and add all 8 of our sausages to a casserole dish. We're looking for a relatively snug fit, but something where the walls are higher than the actual size of the sausages. And as you see here, is pretty much the perfect sized casserole dish. And we then want to take a kettle of boiling water and we're going to pour it so that it completely covers the sausages. We're looking for a nice good level of water in here. Once the sausages start to float, we know we've got enough water. We then want to take and add them to our oven. Be careful not to burn yourself with the hot water, so if you've got a type of glove that's going to protect your hands, then you're going to use that to put them in there. I do have silicone lined gloves and they're ideal for helping me put it in, but if you don't have them, just be very careful as you transfer it across. And we're then going to cook it in the oven for 1 hour. Once the hour's over, bring them out of the oven, remove them from the water and set them aside to let them cool. Just again, be careful because they're hot, so make sure you're using something to protect your hands when you take them out of the water and when you're actually lifting the tin foil as well. So now that we're ready to actually cook and eat our hot dogs, we're going to slice our hot dog buns. For this I use my sub recipe, which I'll put a wee link here and I'll also put a wee link down in the doobly-doo down below, so that if you're wanting to make your own rolls, which I highly recommend because these are gorgeous. They're not the same as a hot dog roll, they're better in my humble opinion. So however many hot dogs you're going to be having that night, unwrap them from the tin foil, put them on your grill tray and set your grill to high temperature. If you're not having them in the near future, over the next few days, they freeze up exceptionally well, so bung what you're not using in your freezer. Otherwise, let's crack on and cook them. Now, the best and most successful way to cook them, I find, is 2 minutes on each quarter. And all we do is we stick them in our grill, we take them out after 2 minutes and roll them over onto one of the grill slots. So just slide it over one grill slot at a time, and depending on the size of your pan, that should hopefully give you a quarter at a time. I'm kind of lucked out on this particular grill pan because one rollover is as close as darn a quarter. And once we've cooked all 4 sides for 2 minutes, we're going to take them out and we're going to stick them in our roll. So when we cut a roll, we don't want to slice all the way through, we just slice it most of the way through so it will press open and it will hold the hot dog really nicely. Then we're going to serve it with some ketchup, then we're going to add some mustard, don't go too heavy on the mustard, and then some fried onions. I picked these up from a local Indian market because it's far cheaper than buying the ones out of the supermarkets. You get so much more bang for your buck doing it that way, but get them where you can get them. Hi there folks, I really hope this footage takes this time because this is a different attempt and a different night from the very first time I did it because I was in complete blackness due to the amount of light coming in that window and there's still tons of light. So maybe you can see me down here, but I think that makes it worse. So, hot dog, spicy Italian sausage, goddamn gorgeous. So much nicer than meat hot dogs in my humble opinion. It's beautiful. It's got the same sort of texture as you expect roughly from a hot dog, but it's got a spicy Italian taste. It's just crack in, make yourself some seitan, join the Seitan Club. Take care, all the best, stay safe out there. I'm off to enjoy dinner.